All right, lessons from Germany. This is number 4 in the series. There's only a couple more in the series as I look at it and putting it together. And again, the big struggle in this particular series is not finding relevant material. It's paring it down to the point of keeping it within something remotely related to the time frame. Because there's a huge amount of material on Adolf Hitler, his rise to power, the assessment of how he did things, how he accomplished things, how that the house painter from Vienna could possibly get to the point of the dictator of a modern country and scare most of the world as he did, and how was he able to convince the honest, hard-working, good German people that he was the answer, the solution to their problem. Okay? How was he able to do that? Some of those things that we've looked at. In our first session, we focused on what occurred during Hitler's rise to power and recognized that the national church, the Lutheran church at that time in Germany, very evangelical, very Christ-centered at that point in time, had removed itself from any real involvement to the government. It said that his idea was that politics was viewed as secular and the church really needed to operate in the spiritual realm. And so it disassociated itself and said, no, we don't want to contaminate ourselves with those worldly things. Being of the world is one thing. Being in the world is a reality. And we do have to operate, and we have a responsibility to our world. But the lesson of the first one had to do with when you take God out of government, the country will deteriorate in every way. It really will, without saying. For instance, just recently, just in the last few days, Democrat House Republican Representative Jerry Nadler, that's from New York, responding to an appeal from Florida Representative George Stubbe, regarding the authority and morality taught in the Bible. They were, in fact, discussing this Equality Act that we've already prayed for. Representative Nadler's response was, quote, what any religious tradition ascribes as God's will is of no concern of this Congress, end quote. Nadler, by the way, was born and raised Jewish inside of a Jewish home. So, wow. In other words, we have no interest in anything of a religious nature. It has nothing to do with the running of the country. Well, the country's not doing so well, is it, by having removed God from things, okay? You have to wonder, by the way, if this man has ever read either the Declaration of Independence or the Constitution of the United States, because our founding fathers certainly included God in their writings, in the very founding documents of our country. Hitler rose to power promising the German people that he could rebuild the nation's economy, raise them back up to national or international prominence, put the German people back to work and the prosperity. He exploited a national crisis, in this case, the economic aspect. He exploited a national crisis to help him rise to political prominence and power. The people cheered. Second lesson, economic woes can be used to manipulate personal gain and bring control over the people. Yeah, it does. Hitler changed the nation's laws in his rise to power. Okay? He removed the Jews from their status as persons. That might sound funny in the way it's phrased, but as soon as you remove the personhood of human beings, then they are no longer under, or what should I say, the SS now has complete authority to kill at their own discretion the Jewish people, because they're no longer actually people. They're no longer actually persons. They're simply a commodity to be controlled. Okay? They wouldn't be breaking any laws because they changed the laws. Okay? The Jews were animals, not human. Therefore, murder didn't even apply. No trials were put into place. Due process needed not to be followed. Evil had become good because Adolf Hitler had changed the laws to say so. Nothing is wrong by the way, if there's no higher authority than man's laws. All you have to do is change the laws and it's no longer wrong. It's now right. Yeah, that's simple enough. Lesson number 3, just because it's legal doesn't make it right. Yeah, we need to recognize that. Okay, so tonight we come to number 4. Okay, as related previously, in 1923, Adolf Hitler attempted to seize power from the Bavarian government through direct physical action, his brown shirt rebellion. You can read about that and all the stuff that we don't have time for. His defense at his trial was based upon the widespread belief that the Jews were responsible for the defeat of Germany in World War I. Okay? He was found guilty and imprisoned, but while there, he developed a plan on how to tap into the emotional content of the German people. He had tapped into this at his trial when he represented that it was the Jews' fault, and the public response was, of course, what we call today blame shifting, being able to divide up the guilt pie, and a bigger piece was that those people's problem over there. Hitler learned he could sway public opinion if he told lies convincingly enough and long enough. Okay? He could sway public opinion. He was held in Landsberg prison for 10 months. While there, he wrote Mein Kampf, okay, which essentially records the agenda that Hitler would adopt in the future, his future rise to power. In the book, Hitler outlines the techniques to win a hostile crowd to his views. Anger, objections, crowd philosophy. Hitler revealed the techniques he would use over the next 20 years to become the dictator of Germany. Okay? The manipulation of propaganda, the use of the media and public opinion, utilizing speeches and spoken words to woo the masses. This agenda would be used as he rose to power. Listen to a portion of what is recorded in Mein Kampf. It says, this is what Hitler writes. The first task of propaganda is to win people for subsequent organization. The second task of propaganda is the disruption of the existing state of affairs and the permeation of this state of affairs with the new doctrine. While the second task of the organization must be the struggle for power, thus to achieve the final success of the doctrine. Okay? Had it thought out, had it programmed, had it put into place, okay, all the way through. See, the presentation of a new direction, a new philosophy for life, needed to be taught to the German countrymen. They needed to understand this. And as Hitler wrote, he said, I'll even force it on them if necessary, if they don't accept it willingly. Hate is more lasting than dislike. That's a quote from Mein Kampf. Okay. He realized if he portrayed the German people as victims, then hate would fuel his support. The object of that victimhood, the Jews. The object of the hate, the Jews. They weren't really people anyway, you know, as he unfolded his agenda. Now, a side note, it's absolutely terrifying to think what Hitler could have accomplished if he had access to today's media. Okay? The advanced capabilities of television, the internet, and everything that went with it. Hitler primarily used personal oratory, personal speech making, along with radio broadcasts, and a few short movie clips were made here and there. That's what the media was in his day. With today's universal television availability, the ever-growing internet presence with various media formats like Facebook and Twitter, we can only imagine the flames being fanned so much more intently. Okay? The power of Hitler's rhetoric, by the way, cannot be overemphasized. I can recall as much younger, okay, grade school, watching a portion of one of Hitler's speeches given to a crowd of thousands that had gathered outside while he celebrated Christmas dinner in splendor. Okay? Stepping onto the balcony, he addressed the crowd standing in the freezing snow, and in a few minutes had worked them into a frenzy. They reportedly shouted, standing at attention, Sieg Heil, stomping their feet for over 2 hours after Hitler had returned to his dinner. Okay? The power of the spoken word, and possibly even demonic presence, is seen. Hitler realized that if he could control the state media, he could mandate what the people saw and heard. Control it, right? So films, as he rose to power and influence, school textbooks, even children's books, were used to characterize the Jews as vile, while emphasizing the Aryan race as superior and victims. And you think, wow, that's amazing. Good thing that can't happen in America. You know, they're campaigning right now to completely do away with Dr. Seuss books because they are too white, you know, too much of a white supremacy. You know, I mean, they invent this stuff as they go. Yeah, it's not just something that happened 100 years ago in Germany. Watch out for it. A skilled leader, Hitler never related to the masses where the end result would take the nation's people. Nope, he's smarter than that. They were incessantly told, however, that following Hitler's program was for the good of the people, without revealing anything to be perceived as negative. It was always the positive things, the positive, the positive. Never what the price was going to be to get there. Our nation today has experienced the influence of governmental rhetoric with its cries of, it's for the good of the people, as we've seen a supposed medical pandemic utilized to indoctrinate the nation, even with the actual facts showing different results. The skilled presentations, with the voice of authority echoing in the background, has caused complete change of national character and direction. We are now a nation under fear. Yeah, we are completely controlled by fear. The power of media propaganda, even at times without any actual evidence to support its claims, has derailed the economic platform of the nation while causing the populace to yield to the government's authority. The Piper of Hamelin plays on. Okay. Tonight, lesson 4. Propaganda's effects on a nation. Or, my personal subtitle, How to Get Lemmings to Willingly Head for the Cliff. Okay. The indoctrination of people by using propaganda. Now, we call it today media more than propaganda. But most of the stuff on media, as we'll see, if you're already not aware, is nothing more than propaganda. The power of slogans. Shifting gears just for a moment here. The power of slogans. In George Orwell's 1984, everybody read it? Should be required reading, okay, in this day and age, along with Animal Farm and some of the others. But anyway, Ayn Rand is good, The Fountainhead, Atlas Shrugged, all those things, but you know, that you're on your own. In 1984, Orwell introduced us to newspeak, the complete control of the media and what was presented to the people. Okay? It came from the state-run Ministry of Truth. Sounds good, right? Nice little title, the Ministry of Truth. Okay? The New Thought Police presented the mantra of their slogan. You know what their slogan was? War is peace, freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength. And you think, huh? The mantra, repeated over and over and over with nothing else to contradict it. Okay? Over and over and over. The gradual diminishing of personal freedoms, one at a one. I mean, how do you eat an elephant, right? One bite at a time. You just keep working at it. Okay? You just keep working that direction. The diminishing of personal freedoms was sold to the people in a positive light. Okay? The slavery to the state was presented as the pathway to freedom and prosperity. Mm-hmm. Yeah. We'll take care of you, the government entity says. We'll oversee your welfare. We'll write you stimulus checks. We'll have you contributing to the best interest of society. You will be a positive influence on the culture and community around you. We'll tell you where you can best serve and how you can best live. That's 1984, which was written decades and decades ago. Almost prophetical when you stop and think about it. Okay? The takeaway, or at least one here, redefine terminology. Yeah, redefine it. Hitler could see that language would either need to be invented or changed in its definitions. You know, evil was no longer evil, it was now good. It was for the good of the people. You just have to give up a little something along the way. Okay? This stuff isn't new, is it? Okay? Whether currently still there or not, I don't know. But if you've read about Auschwitz, the memorial at Auschwitz concentration camp, and there were some 1.2 million Jews that were murdered there. There is a pile outside the memorial of a heap of children's shoes. Thousands, tens of thousands of pairs of children's shoes. Okay? Many people find themselves openly weeping when confronted with that type of mass murder that took place. Okay? Understand how Hitler sold this to his countrymen. The starvation of children was termed a low-calorie diet. The killing of Jews was the cleansing of the land. Euthanasia was termed the best of modern therapy for the aged. Children were killed in children's specialty centers. All sounds very good, doesn't it? You know, if you're not paying attention to actually what occurred. Okay? Abstract slogans were utilized. By the way, these things are a hoot. I studied abstract slogans, 50 years ago. You know, the second time going through college. You know, abstract slogans are amazing how they can manipulate the thoughts of people. The exterminations of millions of people was termed the final solution, as if there was a problem that needed to be solved. There was no problem. They just wanted to butcher the Jewish people. Okay? But they didn't want to call it murder or butchery or genocide, so they called it the need for a final solution. Okay? The abstract can be used to appeal to the hunger of a nation or an individual. The Black Lives Matter movement, for instance, appeals to many on the basis of social justice and equality, or even civil rights. But it presents no actual definitions which the movement itself utilizes and puts into play. Okay? A few today, only a few, speak of murdering infants in the womb. Okay? We call it terminating an unwanted pregnancy. Okay? Politicians call it women's health or having the right to choose. Okay? But have you ever thought about the need to complete the sentence? The right to choose the murder of an innocent child? No, That's a negative. Stay away from that. Don't go there. Okay? Homosexuality in its behavior is now called an alternative lifestyle or a sexual preference. Yeah. No negatives involved in the terminology. Redefine your terms. Adultery is no longer adultery, just having an affair. Okay? We have value equitable school systems that promote a fairness doctrine. And but try to present the morality of the Bible and see how equitable and fair you are going to be treated. We now have whiteness, where school children are being required to get down on their knees and ask forgiveness from everybody who is non-white in the school system that they were born white. Huh? You know? Wow. Yeah. You want to buck the trend? How did Hitler manage to corrupt and redefine the language of his country? He provided appealing ideas, which at the surface level garnered the attention of the German nation, and he utilized the media of his day to get them to believe an invented myth that Germany's woes were all the fault of the Jewish nation, the Jewish people. Okay? If you can get momentum rolling with such a cultural shift in language, then people will filter out the facts that they don't want to believe. Okay? Might sound strange. You see, what people wish to be true becomes more important to them than what they know is true. We're not talking about rational here. Today's college intelligentsia supports the philosophy of socialism and the socialistic Antifa mob. It's not for lack of IQ, this support. But there is an emotional and intellectual and philosophical appeal to see what is wished for to become a reality, without any real definition of what that reality actually would turn out to be. Hitler also understood the power of the mob in swaying the individual to the mob's point of view. Okay? We say, well, I'm going to stand strong regardless of what the community around me does. Really? Mm-hmm. Really? 200 to 1? 2,000 to 1? Really? By himself, an individual may stand for his or her own sense of right, won't we? You know, if it's just me, you know, the John Wayne, be your own man, stand tall in the saddle, you know, fight your own battles, scotch your own snakes, you know. But if he has to fight the entire 7th Cavalry going the other direction, even the Duke would have some difficulty. Okay? When surrounded by scores, hundreds, or even thousands of his peers heading in a different cultural direction, that same individual will almost invariably cave to the pressure and join the mainstream philosophy in action. We call it peer pressure, just in a general sense. It has been rather proverbially stated that the nail that gets hammered the most is the one that sticks up out of the board the farthest. Okay. Yeah. Again, in our own day, many of those marching for the cause of this or that or whatever are simply swept up by the inflaming rhetoric of the moment, the peer pressure of the surrounding mob. They're simply joining with the other lemmings on their march to the sea. Such a response is not only sad, but it's dangerous to them, and even so, more dangerous to any that might stand in their way and oppose the march. Hitler said, this is a quote, "How fortunate for governments that the people they administer don't think." End quote. Wow. Bold statements. Of course, he didn't make these statements in front of the people. He made them to his select little group, and then they were recorded to be published well after his death and the fall of the German nation after World War II. Hitler knew, you see, that it was possible for normal people to commit atrocities beyond measure by convincing them they had to fall in line with the philosophy of the masses. Everybody's doing it. It's the expected norm. You know? I mean, you've got to go along with the majority. You know? Really? Wow. Get in line with the lemmings. Right? Anyone who didn't fall in line, kind of like somebody trying to swim upstream as the current against him grows and grows and grows in its force. Such a person is going to be demonized, slandered, misrepresented, falsely charged, and ridiculed. Why? because he doesn't follow the rear end of the lemming in front of him. That's why. Yeah. Independent thought is not considered an asset to the pigs that run the farm. Lutzer stated in his book, quote, "Perhaps the most enduring lesson of Nazi Germany is that ordinary people, simply concerned about living their own lives, could be motivated to become part of an evil movement through the power of compelling propaganda, intimidation, and mass euphoria." End quote. Ordinary, honest, hardworking, everyday people, your neighbors. Yeah. Note that the make-believe world, which appeals to the masses, never mentions the dark side of the process, the cost that's going to be paid. Winston Churchill said, "The desire to believe something is much more persuasive than rational argument." I could name you scores of situations in my own times on this earth where dealing with people, I found that to be true. You see, socialism is an excellent example. Tried scores of times through the centuries in cultures all over the globe, socialism has repeatedly and consistently failed. Why? Then do people flock to it? What's the appeal? Because it presents the myth of a utopian existence, an Easter egg world that has no downside. People that get into that cultural current refuse to acknowledge their imminent failure because, with no data to support it, their idea is this time it will work. And pure bliss will be the result. Orwell's Animal Farm simply cannot be bested in presenting the fallacies of such a myth. There will always be, in fact, there must be pigs that are more equal than any of the other animals. Somebody's got to run the show. Somebody has to control the propaganda. Somebody has to make the decisions which direction the lemmings have to go. Okay? Wow. Bonhoeffer warned Germany about Hitler early. He was ignored because the masses chose to believe the promises of prosperity and power. Bonhoeffer was deemed subversive and an enemy of the people, imprisoned and eventually killed by the Nazis. They almost made it to the end of the war, but didn't quite. 1 Samuel chapter 8. You make a note of it. Don't have time to do a lot of textual stuff. Nation of Israel became inflamed with the idea of having an earthly king to rule over them. After what? The rest of the countries around them had earthly kings, and it looked so grand. It looked so magnanimous. It looked so wonderful on the surface. Okay? They wished to be like the other nations, you know, regardless of having this unique and special relationship with God himself. God told Samuel in, where is it? Chapter 8, verse 7, something. They have not rejected you. They've rejected me, that I should not reign over them. And any student of the Old Testament history knows the end result did not work out very well for Israel. They gave up the best for something they deemed as better according to the world's standards that surrounded them. The AIDS example. Wow. Yeah, let's talk about AIDS for a minute. In the 1980s, AIDS was in the headlines across America. It was in every newspaper, on every talk show, in every newsroom. Okay? The big problem, you think, problem? Well, yeah, the problem was AIDS. No, that wasn't the problem. The problem was that AIDS was most prominent by far and largely in homosexual communities, primarily in homosexual men. Okay, and their illicit moral relationship with other men. The public view was that it was a gay man's issue. What to be done? What to be done? If you were promoting the gay agenda, what could you do, to change that perception? Eric Pollard, name that I'd never heard of until I started doing research, was the founder of ACT UP. That's ACT It's a militant homosexual group of the 80s. And he openly admitted to studying and utilizing Hitler's Mein Kampf to redefine the issues, redefine the terms. Pollard wrote, let me give you a quote here, because this is just so good to understand this, okay? He says this: the magnitude of a lie always contains a certain factor of credibility, since the great masses of the people in the very bottom of their hearts tend to be corrupted rather than consciously and purposely evil, and that, therefore, in view of the primitive simplicity of their minds, they're talking about our minds, by the way, they more easily fall a victim to a big lie than to a little one. Since they themselves lie in little things, they would be ashamed of lies that were too big. What he's saying, in effect, is it's easier to sell a great big lie than it is a whole bunch of little lies. The lie that Hitler sold Germany, it's the Jews' fault. The Jews are the ones that are tearing the nation down and caused our defeat under the Kaiser in World War I. That's why we're in economic, military in collapse. That's why we're such terrible economic and social conditions. It's the Jews' fault. Okay? Tell them the lie. Pollard quotes Hitler, quote, by clever and persevering use of propaganda, even heaven can be represented as hell to the people, and conversely, the most wretched life as a paradise, end quote. Got the right propaganda, you can sell ice-making machines to Eskimos at the North Pole. Salesmanship, propaganda, okay? How to promote this? Well, we've all heard the word tolerance, haven't we? Tolerance. It's definitely a buzzword in our culture. In the book, The Homosexual Agenda, written by two guys, Sears and Austin, outline the transformation of the American mind regarding the homosexual issue. And without getting too bogged down and boring you with all the particulars, I'm just going to high grade the three main points that come out of that. Number one, wear down the opposition. The idea is to keep hammering away with statements and slogans of your choice that they become so commonplace to the masses that you just wear the people out. You wear the ability to resist. People just get tired of hearing. Fatigue sets in. The people get tired of the whole thing. Let's just wrap it up, tie it off, and move on. Let's just not even, let's not go there anymore. And good people are willing to make concessions just to put that behind them and move along with their lives. The U.S. today, the average American is reported to watching between 5 and 7 hours of television per day. Wow, where do you find the time? Well, most of us don't read anymore. Did you not? We watch TV instead. And when we watch it on our little smartphone thing, or when we watch it on a tablet, a computer screen, a big screen, and you can't go into a restaurant without being inundated, for crying out loud. It's like you can't digest your food anymore if there isn't a big screen TV blaring away in the corner. Yeah. Many of the programs, however, prime time very much included, promote a positive light of homosexuality and a very negative attitude towards the intolerance of those straight people. While ridiculing as the straight people being unwilling to change with the current philosophy of the new wave. That applies in all kinds of areas of our culture, by the way, not just the gay and lesbian movement. In addition to wearing them out by just keeping hammering away, work on the emotions. This is one I probably could have got a minor out of in college because with the psychology stuff. The media presentation sees the gay movement as victims. You want to know where they got that from? The rhetoric of Mein Kampf. Portray your people as victims. The straights are the nasty and aggressive opposition. If you're gay, you've been oppressed, okay, by the straights, right? And so appeal to the sense of fair play. That's not right. That's not fair. We're getting picked on. Okay? Yeah, appeal to that. Okay? They play. Obviously, special protective legislation is needed because we're being unfairly abused by these nasty straight people out there. Okay? Such buzzwords as tolerance, fairness, victimhood, loving others, equal rights. All those things are emotional buzzwords. They're not just intellectual ones, they're emotional ones. They grab a hold of our insides. We're talking about this, well, somebody's being unfair. Well, we need to set that right. Don't we root for the underdog? The big bully, kicking sand in the face of the 97-pound weakling. Don't we root for the 97-pounder as he gets the Charles Atlas things and gets these big muscles like Arnold, and goes out and exacts justice and revenge and retribution and emotional. By the way, emotions are impossible to deal with rationally. I don't even bother anymore as a pastor. Somebody comes in and is emotionally distraught with a problem. I deal with the emotional distraughtness because you can't solve the problem until you get past the emotions. Yeah. Rational arguments will never win the day when held up alongside of emotional fervor. Essentially, it comes down to this. Don't try to make me believe what you do because I know how I feel about it. I'm not interested in what you believe. I know how I feel. By the way, that's the same thing with experience versus doctrine. It's got a very parallel application when it comes to spiritual truth inside the church. First was wear out the opposition. Second, work on the emotions. Third thing is the cause is just and righteous. Tie in the appeal to civil rights. People fall all over themselves getting in the line. Who won't defend the justice involved, defending the rights of people getting picked on? Yeah, all there is to it. We like the underdog. We call what we call social justice moves the emotions of the people to protect the weak from a hostile society, right? Yeah, that's why we call it social justice. The little guy has equal rights. Yeah, gays are portrayed as victims being persecuted by nasty people. The masses will choose to disassociate themselves from those nasty, vile people. They may not agree with the gays, but they don't want to be lumped in with those nasty, persecuting, straight people. Okay? Defund the police. Why? Because they're shooting blacks, or gays, or Latinos, or you pick one out, I don't care. Statistics show you that cops shoot 4 times as many white guys as they do all other ethnic groups put together. But you don't hear that because that doesn't serve the agenda of defund the police. Okay? It bypass the facts. Appeal to the sense of fair, and if you need to, redefine it. Get the lemmings moving. The cliff's over there. Get them pointed that way. Get them on. Get the idea. Hitler's approach was to destroy the credibility of any in opposition to him. Today, we find there is no allowed discussion regarding legitimate reasons for opposing the homosexual movement. There isn't. Try it. Okay? You can have religious convictions. Ignore it. Okay? How about natural laws of 2 sexes? And people redefine that and say, well, there's gender identity. Gender identity has nothing to do with biological sex. Okay? Absolutely nothing. That's a politically invented term, is all it is. Talk about family structure. Child rearing environments? No, they don't want any of that. They'll redefine the terms, maneuver around it, and come up with their own conclusions. Opponents to the march to the sea are called hate mongers, radicals, bigots, right wingers. You attach the buzzwords, and the imagery causes the masses to say, I don't want to be associated with that kind of people. I don't want to be associated with hate mongers. I don't want to be identified with people that are mistreating other people. See how that works? Now, in honesty, I'm going to be honest. There are some sad situations where our side has poured gas on the agenda of the gay movement because we have been nasty. We have been hostile. We have been unnecessarily unkind, okay? Name calling, feminazi, and so forth. Absolutely no place for that kind of stuff. All that does is fuel the fire, fan the flame. It doesn't solve or resolve anything. Calling people names is very useful for a misdirection. It's a smoke and mirrors thing. But that way, see, you don't have to deal with any actual issues, but you can ramp up emotions. Unfortunately, sometimes we're guilty from our perspective. Unfortunately, propaganda is at its most effective when holding forth the misty light of subjective non-analysis based on an end agenda which is seldom, if ever, recognized by the masses. Okay? I'm going to read that to you again. Propaganda is at its most effective when holding forth the misty light of subjective non-analysis based on an end agenda which is seldom, if ever, recognized by the masses. That's called manipulating the people. And you can do it so effectively by media, propaganda. Okay? Yeah, you really can. A few media notes, and well, by the way, we could go on for hours. I'm sure you're all ready for an all-nighter anyway. The media almost always, does it not, today represent gays as loving, kind, and normal. Okay? Okay. Anti-gays, on the other hand, straights, are perceived and portrayed as hateful, spiteful, bigoted, and judgmental. GLAAD, you know what GLAAD is? Gay and Lesbian Alliance Against Defamation, GLAAD. Okay. Monitors homosexual roles within Hollywood and media presentations. They openly use pressure tactics to keep these presentations in line with their agenda. Disagree and you are branded homophobic and guilty of hate speech. School children at early grades are now, in our own country, regularly exposed to homosexual agenda and the propaganda that goes with it. Parents with conservative views and morality are pictured as stupid, bigoted, radical, right-wing, and people that have no tolerance for alternative sexual preference. Okay. Can you imagine if Christians were to get an agreement with Hollywood and the media that there would never be a portrayal of Christianity presented that wasn't positive? We'd be immediately branded as censoring free speech and branded as haters of alternative lifestyles, and so on and so on. Okay? Probably the other biggest example in our contemporary culture is the Muslim movement and the media's representation. You offend the Muslim community, you'll get hammered. It's just that simple. Maybe not by the Muslims, but you'll get hammered by the media. Okay? Facts aren't the issue. You will be portrayed as intolerant of other people's faith. Historical truths will be completely ignored or explained away by some statement to the effect that Muslims aren't like that anymore. As they butcher Christians around the world, and just in the last few days have taken hundreds of girls from a Christian school captive to become sex slaves, okay, out of a Christian school in Africa. Okay? Not The first, only, or last, I'm sure, sadly enough. See, the days of John Cameron Swayze are long gone. Some of you too young to even know John Cameron Swayze. Arthur Cronkite, another newsman of the 60s and 70s, in his heyday as a news anchor, was polled as the most trusted man in America, simply because he read the news in front of a camera, okay? Now, there have been times, and I'm thankful for them, in our country's history that the news media stood as a watchdog regarding the excesses of government. But as the current of mainstream opinion picked up speed, the newsrooms of America have caved in to the rating wars. To stay on the air requires viewers, because viewers bring income. Mainstream viewing, compelled by the manipulation of media propaganda, will submerge itself further into the current of that's what the people want. Advertisers and sponsors of programs, including news, okay, will yield to the threat of diminishing revenues that comes from a drop in the ratings. They will see their profit, their very existence, depending on those on not offending those within the power structure's highest levels. Let me summarize it this way. Don't mess with the pigs, dude. The pigs call the shots on the farm. Yeah. Listen to Albert Einstein. Everybody, I think, forget Swayze and Cronkite. I bet you've heard of Einstein in some form or fashion. Einstein was a Jew. He was exiled from Germany in 1930, I don't know, 36, 7, somewhere in there. This is from an interview with Times Magazine in December of 1940. This quote, "Being a lover of freedom, when the Nazi Revolution came, I looked to the universities to defend it, knowing that they had always boasted of their devotion to the cause of truth. But no, the universities took refuge in silence. Then I looked to the great editors of the newspapers, whose flaming editorials in days gone by had proclaimed their love of freedom. But they, like the universities, were silenced in a few short weeks. I then addressed myself to the authors, to those who had passed themselves off as the intellectual guides of Germany, and among whom was frequently discussed the question of freedom and its place in modern life. They are, in turn, very dumb. Only the church stood squarely across the path of Hitler's campaign for suppressing the truth. I never had any special interest in the church before, but now I feel a great affection and admiration for it because the church alone has had the courage and persistence to stand for intellectual truth and moral freedom. I am forced to confess that that which I once despised, I now praise unreservedly." End quote. Wow. We criticize. We've already talked about this in this series. We criticize, and with some very real reasons, the actions and the failures of the church in Germany during Hitler's rise to power. The church should have, and very likely could have, made a stronger stand and possibly brought about a real difference in the nation's direction. Some did, okay? The Bonhoeffers, the Niemöllers, and a select group like them were courageous enough to toe the line. But the academia, the intellectual elite, the newspaper magnates, all fell into the state party line. They justified their actions by shouting, "It feels like the right thing to do. It's what the people want. It's for the good of the people." America today, unless you're one of those completely swayed by groupthink, by the way, you've heard that term, groupthink? That, you know where it comes from? 1984. Yeah, that's where it was invented, okay? Okay. Unless you're swayed by that, the groupthink of everybody knows this is the right thing to do, you have to conclude the vast majority of our educational system, especially at college and post-grad levels, are completely immersed in defending and promoting homosexuality, the causes of Black Lives Matter, and the Muslim movements in our country. Not passive, not straddling the line, but very proactive. Don't expect any tolerance if you dare claim freedom of speech in your opposition to these movements. Facts are not the issue. Okay? I'm going to stress that. Facts are not the issue. The movement of the mainstream of our culture has progressed far beyond acknowledging that there's any real value in facts that aren't in agreement with mainstream philosophies. A Muslim rally on campus? No problem. BLM speeches, likewise. Homosexual presentations, promoted by the college professors and the administrators. Christian speaker, usually not even allowed. Shouted down as hate-mongering religion. Don't expect tolerance to apply to those with conservative views. Criticism of any kind will be proclaimed as hate speech. That's a nice buzzword, and you can define it almost any way you choose to, because there's no certain definition. The time is coming when, in all likelihood, pastors will be regularly jailed for quoting the Bible regarding homosexuality. Churches will be sued with long and costly lawsuits for not marrying homosexual couples, and find their doors closed as well. The mantra: every couple has the constitutional right to be married according to their own wishes. Sounds pretty reasonable on the surface, doesn't it? Yeah. That's the way it works. That's how propaganda works. Biblical view basically will be designated as hate speech. Laws will continue to be enacted which grant civil rights to groups that don't even qualify in that category according to our Constitution, let alone using biblical definition. Any criticism of Islam will be viewed as an attack on the Muslim religion and will be responded to with intimidation, threats, and lawsuits. Been going on now for a couple of decades, getting worse. Don't expect the news media to report anything remotely like fair and balanced. They know who butters their bread. You got to have the ratings. You got to have the sponsors. They know where that comes from. Advisory boards will be set up, are being set up as to be watchdogs on radio, TV, and the internet to ensure no negative portrayals of Islam, homosexuality, or whatever the mainstream current movement happens to be. The open censoring of the conservative philosophy during the past presidential election is a current example of the path we're headed down on our march to the sea. The pigs run the farm, folks. Examples from Europe, you want just a few? Okay. Geert Wilders. Anybody? No, probably not. A member at the time of the Netherlands Parliament, okay, spoke out, and this is 20 years ago, against the impending dangers coming from the Muslim community. He was charged with inciting hatred and discrimination against Muslims, and he now goes everywhere constantly with armed bodyguards. Okay. Theo van Gogh, again, not a common household name, he was a film director. He made a movie about the treatment of Muslim women, which cast Islam in a poor light. He was murdered on the streets of Amsterdam in 2004. That murder was celebrated across the Muslim world. The common mantra of American Muslims and the gay movement: tolerance. We deserve equal respect. Okay? Sounds good until you realize that any other point of view is not tolerated at all. They present themselves to mainstream America through the media as loving, kind, tolerant, and promoting equal rights for all, except the dissenting voice of Christianity. Censorship, folks, is still censorship. You know, whether it's Zuckerberg or whoever that does it on Google or Amazon or the internet in general, or whether it comes from the White House, the Congress, the TVs, the news medias, it doesn't make any difference. Censorship by any other name is still censorship. Okay? Doesn't make any difference what spin is put on it. Mark Harding, Canadian pastor, okay, in the 1990s, he brought the message to his church and his community that the Muslim movement was potentially dangerous. He was sued and taken to court, where he was charged with Islamophobia for quoting verified facts about the teachings and practices of Islam. He was quoting the Quran. Appeals arrived at the Supreme Court of Canada. His conviction was upheld. The Muslim community rejoiced that Harding's hate literature had been punished. Then came in the United States, September 11th, 2001, the loss of 3,000 American lives at the Twin Towers in New York. Of course, the media, fearing the Muslim movement, did its best to attribute the murder of these people as having been done by separatist extremists. And those separatists that had flown the planes into those towers didn't in any way actually represent the Islamic community, because the Islamic community is actually a religion of peace. Spin doctors, we call them. Hitler used them effectively, and they're behind the keyboards of every media outlet today in our land. Today, America's churches still has a niche, I believe very obviously shrinking, to operate within the bounds of religious freedom and the freedom of speech. But those bounds are being eroded by the propaganda of the media, as well as judicial decisions, which are often directly influenced by the power players moving the mainstream culture. Swimming against the current is an exhaustive procedure and increasingly a dangerous one. Just go talk to Judy Boyle about how easy even the state legislature in Idaho is. And you can only imagine being a conservative Christian trying to go head to head in the legislature of New York City, or of the state of New York. Wow, yeah, pretty tough stuff, isn't it? Oprah Winfrey's theology says there are many paths to God. Pick out the one you like and be happy, because all paths lead to heaven. Mainstream media promotes this. The powers that be have no issue with the philosophy of that type of religion. Just don't inject the exclusiveness of Christ as the only way to heaven. Don't try to do that, because that might not promote the cultural movement of the lemmings heading out of town. Governor Kristi Noem, South Dakota, has refused to lock down her citizens for COVID-19 despite a ton of pushback for her stance. She says this, quote, "I gave my people all the information I had, told them I trusted them, gave them personal responsibility to make the best decision for their families, and allowed them to put food on the table too," end quote. Anita Dunn, who is a Biden advisor, has called the coronavirus pandemic the best thing that ever happened for President Biden. Governor Noem's response to that was this, quote, "What Anita Dunn said here confirmed exactly what I've been saying for months." This is the part you need to get. "The media and Democrats were using this virus to promote fear and a political agenda. They wanted to scare people in order to control them, and they did it to push an agenda where really they could take over this country and change what America looks like." She goes on and says, "We need to wake up and understand this was calculated and on purpose." What Anita Dunn said confirms what we have thought and have said out loud for many, many months. It should be alarming to the everyday hardworking Americans who really do love this country. Lesson number 4, propaganda's effects on a nation. Or, how do you get lemmings to willingly head for the cliff? Just a few thoughts just in closing here. In probability, there will come a day when the preaching of the gospel message of the cross will be deemed hate speech. After all, the one way of the Bible excludes the equality approach of the propaganda used to manipulate and control masses. Holding to biblical doctrine will not allow godly pastors to waffle when pressured to allow Muslim and gay philosophies equal place amongst God's people. We're simply not going to do that. And most of us will go to jail because of it. Remember, Christianity in the first century was under the dominion of Rome. Rome didn't really care about another religious cult group, as long as they didn't go counter to the mainstream dogma that viewed Caesar as the God. Okay? Our fight's not a new one. In Acts chapter 4, following the healing of the man in the temple by Peter and John, the Sanhedrin called the apostles on the carpet. Their conclusion, what shall we do to these men? For indeed a notable miracle has been done by them, manifest to all that dwell in Jerusalem. We cannot deny it, but that it spread no further among the people, let us straitly threaten them, that they should speak henceforth no more in this name. And they called them and commanded them not to speak or to teach in the name of Jesus. Peter and John answered and said unto them, whether it's right in the sight of God to hearken to you more than unto God, you judge. We cannot but speak the things which we have seen and heard. Not long following that, they were arrested again for preaching the gospel. And Peter declared we must obey God rather than men. Acts chapter 5. Verse 33 records the result of this was the nation's leaders plotted to kill the apostles. The church has been here before. It likely will be here again. Hitler was right. He knew how to manipulate and control the nation. Propaganda can change the nation, but it should never change biblical truth or our commitment to it. Okay? Father, as we bow before you, we are amazed at the parallels, sad ones, tragic ones, that we see developing in our own country. That the reality is you don't call us to comfort, you call us to commitment. We are to be wise as serpents, and harmless as doves. That doesn't mean we're ignorant, keep our heads under our armpits, or sleep with our head under a rock somehow, setting our brain into neutral. We are to be wise, discerning, but yet committed, kind and loving, but yet firmly entrenched in biblical truth. So, Lord, give us the right balance, we pray, to address the culture around us. Let us be able to be informative to people who are honestly ignorant of how they're being manipulated by the mass media attack, the propaganda that was so well used by Hitler, and we see such a parallel in our own lives today. Lord, we thank you for the privilege of serving you even in these times. In Christ's name. Amen.